So I am currently the Executive Director of Medi-Cal and Cal-AIM for Cal Optima Health, which is the Medi-Cal health plan for Orange County, California. I'm a social worker and I identify with that very deeply. My whole career has been social work. I started out with my bachelor's working in a nursing home. I was a social worker in a nursing home and did that for a few years. And after about a year and a half, my boss asked me to be the administrator and asked me to go through the administrator's program. And it was a Filipino-owned nursing home. And to be honest with you, I wasn't really interested. But I was quickly told that I was offending culturally because I wasn't taking advantage of an opportunity that she quite honestly did not offer a lot of folks. So I did it, and I had to take the state tests. And I passed the Title 22 test very quickly. But the other test I took multiple times and I could not seem to pass. And then I got a tutor. That tutor told me, well, Kelly, the reason you're not passing is because social workers have no business in administration. So those were fighting words, and needless to say, I passed the next time. So did that. I moved on to running an intergenerational daycare. And then I was fortunate enough to be the chief operator. I'm a CEO, chief executive officer for a nonprofit in Los Angeles, whose mission it was to improve the health of under-resourced communities. I'm a loyal person. I stayed at each of those jobs for many years, and now I find myself at Cal Optima Health. So I'm getting a doctorate in social work, but it's a practice. You know, doctorate is really the practice of a profession. And when I started doing that, I did it more so for the accomplishment for myself. I told myself several years ago that this is what I wanted to do. Wanted to set a good example for my children, just to be quite honest. Now that I'm in it and I'm almost done, it was an incredibly good decision for my career. It's allowed me to do a few things. One, it's allowed me to put the language to what I'm doing. You know, things that I know work or practices that I've utilized. I didn't necessarily know the words or the right language to describe them. Now I do. It's also given me the confidence to recognize the importance and the need for social work in healthcare, and the need that we have to design the programs that we're implementing, to design the interventions, and to apply a design process to those practices. And it's given me the confidence necessary to do it. And I think Orange County particularly is seeing some of the benefits of that right now, because some of the programs that we're launching there have been designed recently by me and my team utilizing those practices. So I'm thrilled. I've had amazing mentors consistently through my professional career, and I think they've come in two different types. There's been the mentors that have made the recommendations, like I mentioned earlier, that you need to, get your license to run a nursing home. I've had mentors that have, encouraged me to continue my education. Those are important mentors, but I have other types of mentors as well. I've had other mentors through my professional career that I've been able to go to over and over and over again as I've made professional choices, as I've come up with ethical situations at work or in my job, when I've decided if I'm going to take a new job, that have helped me process those decisions. They bring their expertise, their background, their knowledge, their connections to help me process that. Not necessarily to give me the answer, but to help me process it myself. Everybody needs a few of those folks in their lives to help them through those times, and I am so indebted to the people that have provided me that through my professional career. I can honestly say I wouldn't be where I am if that wasn't the case. In fact, as far as networking is concerned, it's a whole nother ball of wax with networking. I think networking also plays two different roles, right? You have your networking to meet people in the space so that you know the players and you know the names. But then there's the other kind of networking that is really building relationships, real genuine relationships that transcend wherever you are. And the job I have today is because of a relationship that I built years ago. The job I have today is because the gentleman who's the CEO of where I work now was the president of my board 10 years ago. Built that relationship. It was a professional relationship. It was a bridge I didn't burn. And now I find myself in an incredible new position professionally. I would never have known 10 years ago that that was going to transpire, but it was a networking. And, through the years, he'd call me, he'd ask me questions, he'd ask me for advice, I'd give it to him. He needed me for something, he needed me here, he needed me there. I made myself available, and now look what happens. So I think those are two different types of mentorship and networking, and both are necessary. Negotiating administration as a woman is definitely different. I look at who I am today and where I was 15 years ago, and I am a different woman. I'm a different leader, and there was a lot of growth that had to happen. Sheryl Sandberg wrote the book Lean In, and one of my favorite quotes from that book is she said, "Men are judged by their potential. Women are judged by their accomplishments." And I think that is so true. We are judged whether or not we've already done something, where men are looked at what potential they have and could they do it. That is absolutely a reality. We have to make sure we're at the table. Imposter syndrome is so real. I remember early in my career being asked if my husband was okay if I travel. I remember being told that my hair was not professional because it moved when I shook my head. I mean, I'm not, these things, I don't know that men are told these things. So women lead differently, and I think women need to lean into the way they lead. Women lead collectively. I think we are more collaborative. I think we understand what cooperation and collaboration and partnership looks like from a different perspective. And I think as female leaders, we need to take advantage of that and promote that. I am a huge advocate and a huge proponent of collective leadership. When I ran my nonprofit, my entire leadership team was female. And I said over and over again, the pandemic was one of the most difficult things we did. And I said, National Health Foundation did so well because we had 3 CEOs, not 1. It was true collaborative and collective leadership. And that looks like that. It looks like things are divided equally and people take their roles. I don't think men lead that way naturally. I think women do. So my advice to females in this space is to not necessarily look at what we're not, but to look at what we are, and to take advantage of the traits that we do have. Make sure we're sitting at the table, not in the back of the room, but at the table. Make sure our voice is heard, that we don't always have to wait for someone to ask, but we interject and tell them what our opinions are, and that we work together, and we kind of rise together. We bring each other along together. It means a lot. Sure. I think education is clearly a foundation. You have to have an education. You have to have a bachelor's and more than likely a master's. I'm getting my PhD, my doctorate. So you have to be educated. The internships, I think, are very important. Getting your foot in the door is important. But the piece that I would add that might be a little bit different is don't pigeonhole yourself into what you think your degree is or what you think you should be doing, but have the ability or try to expand your brain and your mind as to what you could be doing. I'm sure there's lots of people in the world that would say that what the heck is a social worker doing as a major executive in a health plan? That doesn't make any sense. Current company included. Okay, I wouldn't even have thought that I would have been there 10 years from now. That was kind of the dark side, right? But here I am. But you have to open yourself up to the different skill sets and the different places that your degree could be, and make sure not to limit what you think you can do. I think as students that are graduating, they need to have the basics, the ability to write. But I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be able to communicate. And to communicate in a way that's collaborative, that's empathetic, that's inclusive. When I ran my little nonprofit, we had our own little culture, and we created that culture, and everybody was nice to each other, and we were in a little bubble. And now I'm at a health plan with 1,500 people, and I'm often amazed at the way folks communicate with each other, and the harshness, and the results of which are things don't get done, and bottlenecks happen. My team comes in. Not to say that they're amazing and great, but they're pretty amazing and great. We have no background in healthcare, and we've been able to accomplish so much, and people are in awe, and they ask, how do we do that? It's because we know how to talk. We know how to communicate with people. We know how to help folks recognize the larger picture to see how what we're doing is helpful for everyone and moves the mission of the organization. That type of ability to collaborate and communicate is so imperative to success. So I would say communication. I cannot emphasize that enough. I think the writing is important. The ability to compromise, the ability to negotiate, to be able to recognize that your way is not the only way. To listen is so important. To be able to see what the other person is saying. I don't even know how many departments there are at Cal Optima Health. There are so many departments, and we have to be able to communicate with all of them. And the best way to do that is to recognize what they have to get accomplished, what they're thinking, what they need to have happen, so that we can can figure out how to get there together. I can't emphasize enough the importance of that skill. Sure. So my perspective is going to be the social perspective, because that's the space that I'm in. We know that a person's ability to be healthy is 80% dictated by things outside of the traditional healthcare system, outside of going to the doctor. And California has recognized that with the implementation of CalAIM. So I think what's wrong with the system is it took us too long to recognize that. And we have created disparities that are now going to take decades to fix. It takes decades for folks to get unhealthy. It's going to take decades to get them healthy. So the bad news is I think what we've done wrong is we've ignored that for far too long. We've separated traditional health care from the social piece of it. Other countries have not done that. We do that. We separate it, and I think we're reaping the consequences of that. That's the bad side. The good side is I think we've finally figured it out, and we're moving in that direction. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of time to get there. You can't just say, housing is now a benefit of Medi-Cal, and your infrastructure magically has all the capacity necessary to be able to provide those services. It doesn't work like that. Our system is reflective of the energy and the resources we've given it, which have been solely nonprofit and begging and pleading for dollars. Now we want it to be a sophisticated system of care, and they simply aren't there yet. So it's going to take time to build that. It's going to take time to shift that perspective, and it's going to take a lot of resources. The good news is that California is doing it. That's what CalAIM is doing. CalAIM is that recognition that our ability to be healthy is dictated outside the hospital as opposed to in it. So I think we're getting there, but it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of collaboration, and also people shifting their perspective of what healthcare is. And the traditional healthcare system isn't going to like this. This healthcare is the biggest business in the world, right? They're not going to like this shift. So they're going to dig their heels in and fight a little bit. But going back to your original question, and I talked to the students a lot about this at the coffee, was this, in my opinion, this is the future of healthcare. This is where we're going. So when you're thinking about your skill sets and thinking about what you think of healthcare and what it is and what it isn't, broaden your perspective. Recognize that you can't ignore the social determinants of health in this 80% of healthcare when you're thinking about what healthcare is, because you'd be limiting where you could have an impact. Why is mental health and mental health issues so much larger than they were before, and for students particularly? And talking about just the realities of the world, the realities of making it, the realities of being able to support yourself, to support your family, to build a family, as opposed to what it looked like years ago, is daunting. So I think it's understandable how we've gotten there. What are we going to do to fix it? That's a great question. I know there are lots of efforts right now at the state level to bring dollars in for this. I think there's obviously the stigma issue associated with trying to get rid of the stigma associated with mental health. I think we're making some good strides there. Putting mental health systems into the schools. Right now there's a big SB HIP, I think, is the dollars that are coming down from the state to put behavioral health services into high schools and lower, and also college level. I think that's part of the way to solve it, is to make the services available at the educational level where the students are and make those services available. But Jim, we have a lot of work to do. It's overwhelming. Well, the United States has massive healthcare disparities because the United States has built a system that is based on race. And so we have systemic racism that results in the disparities that we see today. I mean, just talking earlier about wealth, when you talk about the social determinants of health, you're talking about the fact that a person's ability to have a house, a person's ability to get a job, a person's ability to go to school, to have transportation, to be in a safe community. These things are all directly related to health. Well, when you have a system in a country that's built on redlining and built on things that have not allowed folks to get that house, to get that education, to live in that community, you have disparities. You have generational wealth that exists in the country that quite honestly allows people to be healthier. And so we're built on that. We're built on that system. And so in a lot of ways, the work of CalAIM and the work of where we're going is trying to fix some of that. But that requires, in my language or language, that requires an anti-racist lens, and not everybody wants to look at things like that. They're willing to look at it from an equal perspective, but not always an equitable perspective, and those are two different things. And so a lot of the effort that's happening right now is trying to make that shift. But when I talked about it earlier, and I talked about the social norms that are connected to that, that's what I'm talking about. Is you can put the policies and practices in place, but if the social norm is still not to recognize that those disparities exist, then we have a harder time implementing those practices. There is bias all through healthcare. I used that example the other day at work, and this, if you don't want to know this, you'll cut it out, but it was homeless and hunger week. And we took it upon ourselves to do a one of those Slidos where we do, people can vote, live. And we took the opportunity to educate folks on homelessness, and homelessness specifically in Orange County. And folks could just vote, what they thought the answers were, and clearly their myths were blown, out of the water. But why do we do that? Why do I feel like I need to do that? I do that because implicit bias in healthcare exists. I know it does. I know that when I have a contract for a program that's for the unhoused, and somebody in contracting has 10 contracts to process, and one of them is for programs for the unhoused, that one's going to get processed last because they don't believe that population deserves the money and the services that we're offering. They may not recognize that they believe that, but they do. And so the amount of education that has to happen at this level to try to help equal this is just as important as the programs we're putting in place. We have a lot of work to do in that space.